Today I will be doing a top 10 album countdown, and this is going to be a pretty difficult video to do because of the fact that I have so many favorite albums, but I narrowed it down to 10. I'll be doing a small review of each album, and they are in no particular order, but without further ado, here are my top 10 favorite albums. So starting with the first one is the Front Bottoms' Back on Top. The Front Bottoms are an indie rock folk pop band. This album was released back in September of 2015. Some notable tracks off the album are Laugh Till I Cry and Summer Shandy. Those are two of my favorites, although it's pretty hard to choose. I actually have a tattoo, I don't know if you can see it, the Front Bottoms. They're one of my favorite bands, and this album has held up through time. It has a lot of different vibes to it, and a lot of the lyrics are very fun, but they also have different meanings and tones to them, and a lot of the lyrical content just holds up really well on this record, along with the musical work, and it's become one of my all-time favorite records, and they have become one of my favorite bands, so it's worth checking out. So second album is really difficult for me to choose because it came from my favorite band, Paramore. So I really love all these albums. It was really difficult for me to choose, but I decided to go with Brand New Eyes. Favorite albums have definitely changed from Paramore over the years, but Brand New Eyes has always been one that stuck out to me because of the meaning behind the record and all the things they've said about it, and also the artwork's pretty cool, and the sound is just very powerful. From the first song, Careful, down all the way to All I Wanted, this record really holds up all the way through. This album was released in September of 2009, and two tracks I'd really recommend off of it are Careful and Ignorance, which just so happen to be the first two tracks on the album as well. So the band Paramore themselves mean a lot to me. They are honestly like my favorite band right next to the Front Bottoms. I actually have a tattoo on my ankle of Boy. It's something Hayley Williams used to write on her shirts during some concerts. It stood for Beware of You, but that's another story for another video. But that record means a lot to me, and going to that concert is kind of what drove me to do music. So I really appreciate that record and think it's one worth checking out. And also, Paramore is an alternative rock pop punk kind of band. Their sound has changed a lot throughout the years, but those are, I guess, two genres that would kind of sum up what they've been doing. Sort of. They definitely have a very different sound through the years. Alright, so number 3, Beartooth, Disgusting. This band is a very different band for me, and when I started listening to this record, I wasn't sure what to expect from it, but it was definitely worth the listen, and I'd recommend it highly. They are a hardcore punk and metalcore styled band. The lead singer, he was from Attack Attack. This was the first record Beartooth came out with, and it definitely is a very standout record in the fact that the lyrics have very deep meaning. He talks about really real and sensitive topics such as like addiction, and the album comes together beautifully because the lyrics have so much meaning behind them, and between the beautiful screams and the way that the music blends, this album is definitely a powerful record, and it sounds really good altogether. It's definitely an album worth listening from start to finish. And this album was released in June of 2014. All right, and going off of records that are pretty different, this is number 4, Bad Son's Language and Perspective. This album was released in June of 2014, and I would describe this band as indie rock and dream pop. Two very notable tracks off this record are Take My Love and Run and Rear View, just because those are two of the most, I guess, fun, vibey songs on this record. They're definitely really upbeat, good songs for the summer. This album really vibes well together. It has a very What Is Life kind of feel to it with the lyrical work, but the musical content definitely has a pop, alternative, catchy, flows very well sound to it. It's definitely worth a listen, and the lyrics on this album, again, the lyrics really get you with how much they make you think and how strong they are, and even songs like Cardiac Arrest that are a little bit more repetitive, it holds up to make this record one that has just about everything you need from a record on it. Alright, and this goes on to record number 5, which is Breathe Carolina's Hello Fascination. This record came out in August of 2009. I would describe this band as synth pop and electronic rock, and the electronic sound is what really makes this record stand out above all others. It has a very electronic vibe to it, but it's also incredibly fun. The lyrical work is very trippy. At times, it's hard to tell what they're talking about, which actually makes it really nice because it forces you to think a lot. Two of my favorite tracks off this record are The Dressing Room and My Obsession. Definitely notable tracks. The whole album itself, it blends very well together. One thing that really makes this album stand out as well is its transitions. It's definitely an album you want to listen to start to finish, especially between songs like Can I Take You Home and My Obsession. There's just a nice transition there that makes this album blend and be like whole as an album should be. It's a very notable album. Number 6 is From Indian Lakes, Absent Sounds. I would describe this band as indie rock and alternative rock, and this album is definitely the slowest out of the 10 that I'll be showing today, and by that I mean it has a very mellow vibe. It's very low key. The lyrical work on this album is beautiful, and it definitely tells a heartbreaking story. It really is relatable and real and raw, and that's what makes this album so beautiful. This album was released in October of 2014, and two of the tracks I'd say really stand on this album are Breathe Desperately and Awful Things. Those two tracks are really beautiful, and Breathe Desperately is a little bit more repetitive, but it's the first track I ever heard off this album, and it had me really hooked. And Awful Things is a very slow-paced, dramatic heartbreak song. The video is pretty heartbreaking, but it's definitely worth watching if you like cool visuals to match songs. So this album is definitely worth a listen, even though it has a very slow vibe to it. It'll definitely catch your ear. All right, and number 7 is an album I don't have yet, but it's because it's a more recent album, but I fell in love with it last year when I first started listening to it, and it's definitely holding up, even though it hasn't been a whole lot of time, and that would be Declan McKenna's album, What Do You Think About the Car? This album is really beautiful, and it's fairly new, but it definitely has so much lyrical content that is amazing. The music is beautiful. Declan himself has a great voice, and it really pulls through in this album with the emotion. One thing that really makes this album a standout is how political he's willing to get and how many things he's willing to discuss. He doesn't hold back, and it really shows through on this album and how meaningful it is and how good the lyrical content is. This is definitely a notable album that deserves a good listen. It came out just last year in July of 2017, so it's almost a year old. It's definitely a beautiful album, and two of my favorite tracks off of the album are Why Do You Feel So Down and Listen to Your Friends. Two songs that have completely different vibes, but show how amazing this record can be and how many different sounds it can have. Why Do You Feel So Down is a very upbeat track that actually has very heartbreaking, kind of sad lyrics, but the song Listen to Your Friends has a very lower sound, but it still holds up in lyrical work as well. I would describe Declan McKenna's music as alternative and indie sound. Right, and album 8 on this list is also one I don't have, and this is the newest album I have on my list. It's by Cecil Frena, and it's called The Gridlock. This album actually just came out in February of 2018. It's actually just reached its 1-month-old birthday today. So back at my college, I just started reviewing indie albums for a local radio station on my campus, and they handed me this album, and it was the first one I ever reviewed, so I wasn't sure what to expect, and I was definitely not expecting it to be so good that it would make my top 10, but this album is quite amazing, and I'm glad I got to listen to it as it came out. Two of my favorite tracks off this record are All My Heroes and Human Math, also two tracks that have very contrasting sounds and feels, but show you just how amazing and diverse this record truly is. All of My Heroes is a very powerful anthem type song that I'll definitely be listening to for a while here out. Human Math is also a tragic type heartbreak story, but it's so beautiful. It's like a ballad. So I was just very glad to have gotten the chance to listen to this album, and I definitely think it's worth anyone's listen. From start to finish, it definitely holds through. My 9th album on this record is definitely one that a lot of people will notice, but it's definitely held up through its time since I started listening to it, so it's definitely worth being on this list. My Chemical Romance's The Black Parade. As a lot of people know, My Chemical Romance is a very alternative rock emo type band. This record came out in October of 2006, and it's held up through its time. It really has. Every track on this album is a hit. Every track on this album will keep you wanting to come back to it. It really is a powerful record, and there's not too much I could say about it, to be honest, because it's just such a good album. It's something you just have to listen to. And of course, my top 2 recommended would be Welcome to the Black Parade and Mama. So Welcome to the Black Parade, it's a big hit. It's what the album was named from, and it has that slow start and that classic build up that My Chemical Romance loves to do. And Mama is honestly such a notable track. It's one of my all-time favorite songs, because it may be a really long track, but it always holds through, and the different changes in the music throughout it, it's such a ballad, but it's also such a powerful song, and it holds through the whole way. It never gets boring through the whole song. So this is definitely one of my favorite albums, and it's very worth a listen if you haven't heard it yet. And going off the lines of very popular albums, my last album is Panic at the Disco's A Fever You Can't Sweat Out, and this is an album that has really held up through time. As the band Panic at the Disco has changed a lot, I still love all their music, and I think that they've done a really good job through the years, but this album really stands out. Amazing debut album. This album came out of September of 2005, so that puts this as the oldest album on my list. So as a lot of you may know, Panic at the Disco is a pop-punk kind of alternative rock band, and the two songs from this album that have always held up for me and have always been personal favorites of mine are Nails for Breakfast, Tags for Snacks, and Build God Then We'll Talk. And Build God Then We'll Talk is very similar to Mama in the sense that it's been a track that has always kept me enticed, and it's one of my favorites, and it definitely makes this album even more notable than it already is. Alright, so those were just brief introductions to 10 of my favorite albums. These are just albums that I've been listening to, some of them fairly new, some of them for a long time, but they've all held up through time, and they're all worth a listen from start to finish. There's not a whole lot I could say about them, but if you haven't heard some of them, you should definitely try and check them out. I try to do a diverse range of genres, but I myself, even though I like a diverse range of music, I'm kind of biased to the like alternative, maybe like indie rock scene too, and kind of emo side, so it's a little skewed, but these are still some records I think definitely hold up. Before I finish, I just want to name a few noteworthy albums that I didn't mention that are still worth an honorable mention. Green Day's American Idiot is an amazing record. Foo Fighters' The Color and the Shape, also amazing record. I'm just gonna keep saying it's an amazing record. Linkin Park's Meteora, this almost made the list, but it was very difficult. It's a very beautiful album, especially lyrically. This thing really holds up. And 21 Pilots' Vessel, I definitely think that this is the album that got me into 21 Pilots, and it's worth a listen. All right, thank you for watching. Sorry, the audio cut out there for a second, but that was it. That was the top 10 favorite albums, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you want, you can let me know in the comments below what are your top 10 favorite albums, or how you feel about any of the albums on this countdown, or anything you want to talk about. So thank you again for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope I can do more videos like this in the future.